Buenas tardes. Y muchas gracias por estar aquí. Si les parece, vamos a presentarnos para que así tengamos más información de nuestras referencias institucionales y también de nuestra conferencia de we want to introduce obviously I introduce you. ¿Te parece, Arcadio?
Myself, Arcadio Gutiérrez Tapico, Managing Director of Spanish.
Luis Santos, R&D Officer, EDP Spain. Miguel Ángel Sanz, Director of Planning and Strategy in CLH, the company of logistics for oil products in Spain.
Alberto Fernández, Strategy and Business Development Specialist, also from CLH.
Javier Latorre, Director of Electricity Regulation from Establish
Rafael Durban, Deputy Director of the Sectorial Advocacy Management of Impetus.
Carlos Martín, Biofuels and Sustainability Deputy Director at the National Energy Commission.
Javier Lara, from the Business Development General Direction of the NAS.
Es mi nombre. Lo repito, Encarnación, del Cell Foundation.
José Alfonso Nebrera, General Manager at ACS Industrial Branch.
César Gallo, Vice President de Repsol Foundation.
CEO of Energy Division of the My name is Yolanda Fernandez. I'm the Director of Environment and Sustainability in the Spain.
Rodrigo Rodríguez, General Manager for Funseam.
Mónica Díaz, working at the regulatory department in Impetus.
Juan Rubio, Economic Research Department of Repsol.
Manuel Bravo, Director of Energy and Environment, Repsol Foundation.
Thank you, Pedro Miras, Chairman of the Spanish Stockholding Corporation, CORES.
Flamenco Barrera, Managing Director de CORES.
Juan Carlos Jiménez, Deputy Director of Studies of National Energy Commission.
Marina Serrano, Commissioner National Energy Commission.
Lola Gadea, full professor of University of
Julián Martín, by Regulatory Affairs at Impetus.
Thank you. Very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for coming. Friday is not the best day in July. Special welcome to Martin Young, our summer seminar speaker. Mr. Martin Young has been head of the Energy Policy Division in the International Energy Agency since 2012. Before that, he worked in the UK Department of Energy and Climate Change, where he was electorally responsible for downstream power policy. As a long-standing UK CEQ delegate, Mr. Young has participated in various energy response reviews and exercises. As a statistician, by training with a master's degree from University College London, Mr. Young worked in a number of UK government departments before focusing on energy, where he became responsible for the UK's oil and gas statistics. In his presentation today, we tackle the new problems of energy security and energy response using the framework. A new framework, well, yes, we are going to expand less. of global competition and integration of energy markets where demand has grown in non-OECD countries. Is that new? We have in front of a new roles of the play. Of the game. As always, an open discussion will follow. These sessions are closed door. So, this way, we think speakers feel free to answer questions understandably. Of course, there will be no press present, and participants are, as you see, executives of Funseam's patron organization, for whom these meetings are arranged, and in this case, other experts, and occasionally, as is happening today, managers from other enterprises join us. Also, members from regulatory authorities. Thank you very much for all people, for you, and over to Mr. Job.
Anyway, thank you for inviting me. I'm very honoured to join you, and I'm delighted to see such a very powerful audience, as it were, with very great knowledge. And thank you very much for the introduction. My slides should last about 40 minutes, and I'm very happy to have an open conversation about some of the things that I'll be raising. If I begin about what is the IEA? Well, it's an autonomous agency that's linked to the OECD. We have 28 members currently, with a global footprint, and we also have the European Commission who participates in committees. And I just highlight we've got 2 candidate countries at the moment, Chile and Estonia. Chile particularly important because it could well be our first member from South America, but they're a little bit slower in advancing, and Estonia, who hopefully will be our 29th member later this year. We act as an energy advisor to our member governments, and there's about 230 of us based in Paris. The IEA has what we call our 4 E's, which are our goals on energy security, environmental protection, economic growth, and engagement worldwide. There's a number of activities beneath that underpin these. My team very much focuses on energy security. My area is the Emergency Policy Division. What does that entail? Well, energy security very much relies upon well-functioning markets. Markets will balance supply and demand smoothly. Given sufficient time, and as long as there's sufficient interconnections, with diversity of supply, different countries, fuels, etc. Robust infrastructure to ensure that it can cope with seasonal fluctuations and appropriate government regulation. Coming from the IEA, which is very much an open market organisation, this is standard creed. The impetus to establish the IEA came from the oil supply crisis of 73-74. At that point, it was realised that countries who were coming up with their own policies to respond, there was competition between them, and the go-it-alone, uncoordinated approach was very ineffective, and that it was actually much better to pool resources and coordinate. So then it became the coordinated approach. You had a lot, it was better than the sum of its parts. And that was behind the IEA's foundation. And what it established was a process so that we could coordinate and establish the safety net of policies, most famous being the emergency oil stocking obligation for over 90 days of net oil imports. But it also included other policies such as demand restraint measures. The IEA retains an operational role for oil security. Emergency response to oil supply disruptions is our raison d'etre, and it remains our core mission. As noted before, our member countries are obliged to hold 90 days of net imports, and the Secretariat has a mandate to coordinate a stock release in response to global supply disruption. The oil stocks cannot replace market mechanisms. They are only there for short-term mitigation, essentially to add liquidity to allow markets to recover. It's also a point that we raise quite frequently with non-member countries that the emergency stocks are not for price management. They couldn't be. They're finite, so they would be ineffective over time, but they also distort market signals. They could discourage investment, which makes, in the longer term, tighter demand and supply imbalances. And they reduce cover for genuine supply emergencies. There's only been 3 IEA coordinated actions. The first one in '91 in response to the first Gulf War, 2005 in response to Hurricane Katrina, and 2011 in response to Libyan collective action. IEA member governments have a number of responsibilities. Primarily, they have to have legislation in place to ensure that they can participate in IEA decisions with appropriate response measures. They also need what we call the NESO, National Emergency Strategy Organisation. This is basically to coordinate the administration's emergency operations, to act as an interface with industry, and also an interface with the IEA. And this is going to be my sole comment about data. But data is actually critically important in all of this. Countries are obliged to compile monthly oil statistics, but actually covers all energy. And in a crisis, they do need to provide information, perhaps on a shorter basis, could even be weekly. Data is a burden, but it's actually critical for providing the evidence base, determining when we should act, and actually monitoring how effective we have been in a collective action. When we started, we had a number of different emergency response policies. On the supply side, there was stock draw and production surge. The surge production really is a bit of, it's really come outdated because most IEA countries, or in fact non-OPEC countries, if they are producing oil, they are producing it at maximum economic efficiency. So surge production doesn't exist without damaging the long-term health of the fields. And I don't think any of the IEA countries now actually claim it. If they did, I'd dispute it with them. We also have demand-side measures, which are demand restraint and fuel switching. A little bit more on those two. Demand restraint is politically more contentious. Clearly, the public don't like having restrictions on their access to fuel. This can be more politically contentious in some countries than others. They break down between the light-handed measures, which can be just the general persuasion campaigns, public advertising, the medium campaigns, which are speed restrictions, occasionally things like the odd and even number plate bans, which some countries have introduced, and incidentally the US used in response to Hurricane Sandy in a couple of states. And then the heavy-handed ones, which are about rationing and driving bans. A lot of our member countries haven't actually done much with their demand restraint policies since the IEA's creation, primarily because it is that much more political and contentious. And there's also fuel switching. This was, in the mid-70s, quite prevalent, but now, on the oil side at least, there's actually not much scope for it. The stockholding obligations that countries have basically fall into 3 categories. They can have industry obligations, where compulsory stocks or compulsory obligations are placed upon industry. This also can include commercial stocks held by companies, public stocks, which are essentially government-owned and held exclusively for emergency purposes and financed by central government budget, or agency stocks, which are managed for emergency purposes and held by public bodies or agencies. There's a variety of different systems across our members. They range from government stocks in these countries, 7 of them, although Slovak Republic is about to change. Agency stocks, where there's a lot more predominantly European, and industry stocks. The group with solely industry stocks is actually going to be reducing because I think that Luxembourg, Greece, and Italy are all planning agencies in the near future. And amazingly, the UK is also considering that route, and that's open for public consultation at the moment. At the very bottom, we should also add those commercial operational stocks. The Slovak Republic just recently has announced that it is getting rid of its government stocks, but they're basically going to transfer to become agency stocks. The emergency response system very much depends on your national situation. So you need to consider things like where the imports come from, where the refineries, demand centres, basically how much refining actually exists, are there pipelines and transportation issues, and also to sort of forward look about where the product, where demand is forecast to go, and other issues like risk contamination, which explains why systems that we have. And as at the end of December, this was the how our stocks varied across our member countries. The US, well, I should say that North America is clearly dominated by the very large public stocks in the US Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which are predominantly crude, although they do hold 1 million barrels worth of product stocks, which they also deployed in response to Hurricane Sandy. That was actually gas oil stocks, predominantly used for heating in the northwest, but they did use that for road vehicles. In Europe, we have a predomination of agencies and not so many government stocks, although some of the agencies are government-owned. And in Asia, in the Pacific region, the Japanese agency and Korean agencies both hold large amounts of crude. When we respond to an oil supply disruption, there's various things we need to consider on if there is a need to pull the trigger or not. First of all, we need to be able to respond properly to any supply disruption that appears to be capable of causing severe economic harm. The market will always balance supply and demand given suitable time and freedom of price movement. But that length of time and that freedom of price movement can cause significant economic harm. We clearly need to understand the market context of the supply disruption, and that's where analysis helps provide some answers. So can the existing spare capacity in stocks, maybe OPEC spare capacity, will the market be able to recover? And if action is required, then the speed and unity are very important. A delayed or hesitant response can exacerbate the situation and cause uncertainty. And it is highly likely that we will need to act before all the information is going to be available. So we will be operating in the world of imperfect information. Key elements to an IEA collective action is the continuous assessment of the oil market. And you might well be aware of one of our flagship publications, the monthly report, but we also monitor it. So this morning I was sent an email telling me that the latest Brent price is $105 a barrel, and that the ejection coup has not affected operations through the Suez Canal. The continuous market assessment is also critical to assess the size of the disruption, the mitigating factors such as OECD commercial stocks, OPEC spare capacity, which all helps determine whether there is a need for an IEA collective action or We have a rapid decision-making framework, which we test regularly. And this just highlighting the fact that we do need to, if we are going to respond, we need to respond quickly. And there also needs to be flexibility in response measures. As noted to begin with, the oil stocks are our key response tool, but there are other measures such as demand restraint in a few places. And the final point here is the fact that we don't, the oil is made available to the market, then it's up to the market to allocate. There's no direction from us where it should go. Which also highlights the communications, and this is critical, having a robust media strategy to make sure we explain what we're doing and we're not operating in a vacuum. And also talking not only to our members, but to key non-member countries, China, India, etc., and to OPEC. But the world has changed very much since the IEA was created. Oil then was very dominant, it still remains dominant, but there is obviously the big growth with gas and renewables. While energy security remains key, the concept has also broadened. These are a number of the disruptions we've had in recent years related to oil, but it can also include some gas disruptions, as well as some electricity ones as well. So, energy security now is increasingly seen as being wider than oil. We've broadened our concept of energy security to cover gas and electricity. We apply a very similar framework to gas and electricity as we do to oil. That emergency policies must be for defined emergencies only. They're not for what should be normal market operations, so seasonal fluctuations. And they need to be designed for specific countries and regions. But there are differences, particularly that gas and electricity are regional rather than global markets, and that there are frequently regulations on distribution and public service obligations. And we have been working with our member countries on these emergency response policies for gas. We have a thing called our emergency response reviews, where we test our country's policies for oil. The last cycle we extended into gas, and later this year we'll be extending into electricity. For the gas emergency response policies, these are some of the key measures, and there are things like use of alternative supply routes, diversity of supply, clearly, gas storage, which is predominant industry. There are a few public stocks. I think Hungary has actually got some gas public stocks, and that's also underground in LNG storage. Spare capacity, if there's spare production, but also demand side measures. And these are very much focused on the interruptible contracts, but there are some things you can have public government campaigns to reduce consumption. There is scope here for fuel switching. That some places, a number of countries have backup generation using gas oil. We're just moving in now into electricity supply security. We have only recently been training our delegates. And this is, again, shouldn't be considering day-to-day operations. It's the more defined, wider disruptions. And it's rechecking the unexpected shocks to the system. The way that we operate all this is through three areas. Our primary work that we do with our member countries are through the emergency response reviews. These are a peer review process. The IEA facilitates it, the IEA Secretariat facilitates it, but the review teams consist of other member countries. We check procedures and the institutional arrangements, and this helps identify strengths and weaknesses. It it also helps share best practice. And it is also a very good training method as well for a number of countries. They can go and participate in review team for another country and actually learn about how their systems and see if they can deploy those on their own. We also have regular exercises. Every 2 years we have emergency response exercise in Paris, and these where we test, we have a number of scenarios, and we explore whether the IEA should respond to disruption. We also look at the more problematic ones, so we can explore clear-cut situations. So, for example, with a very simple one would be Straits of Hormuz if that's blocked. That then immediately would trigger an IEA collective action. But you can have longer, lower level disruptions. So, for example, something with Nigeria, you can have a very low level but slightly escalating disruption that could then start involving LNG. And then that's when the debates becomes quite interesting about when is there a tipping point for us to act. And I've also noted that we've expanded into natural gas and electricity, and our exercises have already expanded into natural gas. It'll be a bit more challenging on electricity. In the review process, we examine a number of different areas. We look also, first of all, we look at actually the market structure to understand refining capacity, demand and supply, the infrastructure issues, what's recent trends. We look at the policy framework of how emergency response policies are designed, interaction with industry, the organisational setup within the administration, how the NESO is set up, and then we also look at how the emergency reserves are held for oil, and examine the release mechanisms, etc. And as part of that, we also check upon the emergency data reporting to ensure that there are suitable links with industry and that information can be rapidly reported to the administration and then onto the IEA. Electricity, as I've mentioned before, is very new for us. We are the new cycle that will be an emergency review cycle that will kick off in October. It's going to explore various concepts, and we'll be looking at rules and standards, asset management. This will include things to ensure that there are suitable policies on vegetation management, which seems to be at the heart of a couple of disruptions in the US, and also between Switzerland and Italy in 2003. The emergency response resources of the administration, and some of the procedures and processes, and other issues such as situational awareness and communication. Examples that we've used for this are the very big disruption in the US in 2003, which was quite clear that the operational management at that point, there wasn't much situational awareness of what was going on. And we're also looking at training. So it should be quite a high level review rather than getting into the nitty-gritty of actual day-to-day operational management. The emergency response exercises, we have, as I've noted, a biennial exercise. The RE6, which was the last one, took place in Paris in last November, and we're planning for ERR-7 for next November 2014. We've been doing these exercises since '98, every couple of years, and we also have bolted on things like workshops for specific or new evolving issues, etc. And we've also started involving non-member countries in these exercises. So I think we've had a number of countries from the ASEAN region, so for example countries like Thailand, Philippines, etc., who have participated in the exercises, and China and India have also participated in the exercises. We have rolled out versions of these exercises to key non-member countries. We've worked quite closely with Thailand, who are very keen to improve energy security and acting as a bit of an ambassador in the ASEAN region. So we have done an exercise with the 10 ASEAN countries, which was based in Thailand. And last year we did an exercise with India. But as noted in the before and is in the introduction, the world is changing. When the IEA was created, OECD countries accounted for about a quarter of production and 3/4 of demand. But that is very much changing now. At the precise moment, I think probably this last quarter, we've reached the tipping point of the OECD being less than 50%. And by 2035, we're going to probably be about 40% or even less. The emerging economies are driving global demand. Very much the usual suspects are China and India, but also other ones like in the Middle East, where there's a lot of demand. And it's very much with their rising economies and their rising living standards. I'm jumping through some of these slides because they're basically saying the same sort of message, but this is where it starts getting pretty interesting, because as their demand increases, their import dependency is increasing. And so issues that they had previously not considered as being particularly important are becoming an issue to them. And this is showing differing trends in import dependency. Everyone apart from the US is increasing. The US is clearly having a slightly different thing with its light tight oil and shale gas. And this is another view of the same sort of thing, where you can actually see how the net imports of oil are increasing significantly from China and India, yet declining from the US. This chart, while looking relatively simple, tries to show how the total oil stocks that IEA member countries have, the effectiveness of that is going to diminish over time unless we can bring in other countries, particularly the new large consumers such as China and India. In some aspects they are persuaded, because both China and India are building stocks. China is definitely is building its own emergency stocks, which I think to equate to about 30 or 40 days, although the information is secret. India has built the storage and is going to be deciding how it's going to fill it and how it will use it. We're working with a number of the countries. And there's various active programs that we have with them, either through joint statements, memorandums of understanding, or work programs. With China, we've had a series of workshops. We are negotiating at the moment with them to do an emergency response exercise. That's probably going to be next year. The issue we have very much with China is that they regard their data as being sensitive, secret, and so the scenario that we normally do for local emergency response exercises, we try to make them local. So when we did the exercise with India, we looked at a disruption affecting India, explore that. With China, we're probably going to have to use a global exercise. Building with them. India, it's been a lot more positive. We've had workshops with them. We've just completed one memorandum of understanding with them, and we'll be preparing a new one. As I mentioned before, we had an emergency response exercise with them last year, which was a great success. And that then encouraged them to allow us to do emergency response assessment. Emergency response assessment is basically the same thing as an emergency response review. And we did that with India last month. And that was incredibly interesting in the sense that they're very well prepared for domestic oil supply disruption. They actually have a brigade in their territorial army that is staffed completely by oil people. And so in a crisis, they will turn these people into military, and if they are striking, they're no longer allowed to strike. But they are unprepared on oil for a global supply disruption. So if they can't get oil in, they don't really know what to do, which is why they're so keen to work with us. On gas, it's a very, very much a different issue. Their demand so outstrips supply, and their consumption patterns are so different to OECD that there's a long way before we're going to be doing much with them. Indian gas demand is at the moment 70% used for fertiliser production. About 5% of its consumption, gas consumption, is for domestic, and for domestic that means using for vehicles and for cooking. And if they don't get gas for the cooking, they'll just switch to LPG. So there's not much we can do with them yet. We're working with ASEAN and APEC countries. There's a series of workshops that we've done. And we also had the exercise in Thailand that helped. We've had a couple of exercises in Thailand, one specifically for Thailand and one for the ASEAN countries. At the moment, we're planning and also an emergency response assessment with Indonesia next year. Indonesia, since it's become a net oil importer, is now getting a lot more interested in establishing emergency oil stocks, and is considering various models. And there's some other ones that we're working with as well. As we've expanded into beyond oil, we've tried to develop a conceptual framework of how we could quantify this, and this is a bit of work that we published a couple of years ago. It's a model of short-term energy security going by the wonderful name of Moses. It uses the contribution of the different energy flows to overall on energy use. It's probably not actually that helpful on this one, so if you I'll just pivot between this and the follow-up one. So what it's trying to show, and you can't see, it has oil, it's crude and then refining and then product. It's got gas, natural gas use, and it's also got coal and biofuels. What it tries to do is show how they contribute to the overall country's energy use, and this is the way it actually gets reported. This is a dummy one. We shared this with our member countries at the 2011 ministerial. We haven't published it since. And at the moment, we're still exploring things like data on it, but also some of the underpinning assumptions. Because one of the things that I think when we did this, first of all, we made some broad brush assumptions about what scale of domestic refining should be. And I think there was a rather arbitrary selection of 40%. So we want to establish something a little bit more robust on that. It's also a useful tool, I think, conceptually we could be exploring more with academia and others. We haven't, the other thing I should flag with this one, and it was a concern of a number of our member countries, we never had any intention to publish a sort of chart of which country is best on energy security. This was all supposed to be just bilateral conversations, and also to help inform the emergency response review process, basically to try and identify which would be the risk areas. So, a few summary points. That there is significant demand growth by non-OECD countries, which is very much changing energy security perspectives. That the market is getting increasingly global and more integrated, and that's creating new challenges and risks. But it also highlights the need for greater dialogue and cooperation. Threats to energy security come from multiple sources, and that we need to be flexibility is critical in all this, with efficient and transparent markets, which is also something we need to work on and persuade some non-member countries on. Government policies can help complement these efficient markets, but there needs to be consistency, certainty, and support for new technologies, etc. But effective emergency response will vary by the energy source. What I'd just like to end on is one of the things that the IEA does is we produce various market reports. We have probably the most famous one, which is the World Energy Outlook, which is the future look, which goes up to 2035. But we also have a couple of various medium-term reports. And these three issues arose from the medium-term oil market report and the medium-term gas market report, which were both published last month. And they go up to 2017. And the idea was really to highlight which were the top three risks on energy security. And so there are one about the rising non-OECD demand, how that is shifting crude supply to east of Suez. In some aspects, we're responding to that because we have the outreach program with countries like China and India, but there's clearly more we need to do on that. The second area is about refinery consolidation and its implications. This has been seen as being very much a European issue, but it isn't. It's across the IEA. Japan is going to be losing a number of its refineries. Australia is also going through a similar sort of situation. We need to think through what the implications are for that. Crude markets are seen as being deep, whereas product markets might not be so deep. There might be less liquidity in them, particularly if you start thinking about the bespoke fuel specifications. There is also a risk that some of the growth in refining capacity, particularly in non-OECD countries, and I'm thinking here in the Middle East and in India, both of those areas are forecast to get significant rising domestic consumption. And you could well have a situation where those currently export-focused refineries pivot, becoming domestic supplies. And at that point, if there isn't spare capacity elsewhere, the price will go up, and we could well find some product shortages. On the gas side, the interesting one there is clearly gas consumption is increasing, and there are a lot of gas production. There's a lot of new production about, particularly in the US. And it does help that the US is clearly being a lot more open to having new LNG infrastructure. But there are a number of bottlenecks with new infrastructure product, or terminals, etc., which particularly I think Australia has some LNG infrastructure which is supposed to be coming on the stream and is actually being delayed. And so I think it was highlighted as the biggest risk for gas is actually the potential delays in some of this infrastructure, and all that cause some tightness. There could well be other issues such as increasing use of gas in transport, but I think that's probably for longer term. And as we start moving into considering electricity, we need to be considering the intermittency of renewable sources, whether the backup exists for those. So I'll leave you with those questions. I hope you found that useful.